我觉得俄罗斯现在应该是穷疯了。
I think Russia is really desperate right now. Our China-Europe freight trains, anything that goes through Russia, they're doing thorough inspections. I'm telling you, Russia's really gone crazy. If they want to take all these goods for themselves, they should just say it outright instead of using these dirty tricks.
Recent data from the China State Railway Group reveals a decline in China-Europe freight train operations for the third consecutive month, driven by increased inspections from Russian authorities. In March, the number of China-Europe trains, including both outbound and return journeys, totaled 1,592, a 1.3% decrease from last year. Container shipments also saw a 7% drop, reaching 164,800 TEUs. For the first quarter of this year, the total number of trains was 4,250, marking a 6.4% decrease compared to the same period in 2024. Container volume also fell by 9.7%, amounting to 145,800 TEUs. According to Caixin News, Yang Jie, general manager of Obao International Freight Forwarding in Suzhou, which specializes in Europe-China freight trains, noted that the company's cargo volumes began declining in the fourth quarter of last year. In January and February of this year, the shortage of goods became more apparent, and shipping rates came under greater pressure. Freight rates from East China to Moscow dropped sharply from $9,000 per 40-foot container in October 2024 to about $4,500 by February and March. The report indicates the main reason for the overall decline in China-Europe trains is the significant decrease in outbound shipments. Yang Jie explained that freight volumes have dropped since last October due to several factors: declining Russian imports of Chinese cars, Russia seizing goods bound for Europe, lower Russian purchasing power, and exchange rate fluctuations involving the ruble. Since late October 2024, Russia has strictly inspected China-Europe freight trains, resulting in the seizure of thousands of containers, causing severe congestion. General Manager Liu Zan of Bondex Logistics in Hunan said, "One of our customers shipped jackets for Christmas. The holiday has long passed, but the goods are still detained." Liu mentioned that 70 containers belonging to his company were impacted. Industry insiders say that some cargo owners now avoid China-Europe trains. Combined with the usual slow period before Chinese New Year, these factors lead to negative growth in train volumes, leaving border checkpoints like Alashanko nearly empty. The Russian government initiated these inspections under Decree 1374, issued on October 15, 2024. This decree expanded on Decree 313 from March 2022, adding machinery, electronic items, and camouflage clothing to a list of banned transit items, targeting military and civilian dual-use products. A Chinese student who studied in Russia for 5 years posted a video saying the Russia-China relationship is not as strong as perceived. He claimed Russia could confiscate goods worth millions overnight, citing the dual-use rule arbitrarily.
说几个真实的案例吧。这是一个
You have a leather jacket, and they say it could be dual use, and they inspect everything. Let me tell you a few real stories. There's this lady, a Russian woman, over 60 now. Her husband is Chinese. She told me a story where she sent 12 containers from China to Russia, and overnight, they were all inspected. Assets worth millions were completely wiped out. Russia, whether it's your goods or foreign goods, if it's coming from China, they've always been very strict with it. They use all kinds of methods to try to limit our stuff.
He also noted that from 2022 to 2023, Chinese new cars entered Russia nearly tariff-free due to Western sanctions. Previously, it was easy to earn substantial profits per vehicle, but now tariffs have jumped above 45%, along with additional fees, leaving little room for Chinese businesses. He added that Russia would struggle without Chinese products. He explained the U.S. accuses China of indirectly supporting Russia because economic trade between China and Russia effectively provides Russia with continuous economic resources, allowing it to sustain the war with Ukraine. However, he emphasized Russia shows little gratitude, mentioning that older Russians from the Soviet era often explicitly refused to rent homes to Chinese tenants. He described their widespread prejudice against Chinese nationals, noting many Russians see China as poor, chaotic, and backward. He advised Chinese citizens to carefully reconsider the reality, as Chinese people living or studying in Russia sometimes suffer quietly, unable to voice their difficulties publicly, simply accepting it as a cost of living abroad. Russia's seizure of ChinaEurope train cargo and reduced imports of Chinese goods come as another major blow to China amid the ongoing trade tensions with the United States. Russian customs data released on April 20th shows that in the first quarter of 2025, Russian imports from China totaled $22.7 billion, down 6.9% from the same period last year. Imports in February reached only $5.8 billion, the lowest since June 2022. Although March showed slight growth of 1.9%, the total remained below $7.8 billion. According to Russia's central bank, despite overall consumer activity continuing to expand in February, retail sales growth slowed to 2.2%, mainly supported by the services sector, while demand for imported Chinese goods weakened. The Russian central bank noted in its March report that public interest in purchasing large non-food items has significantly decreased, including passenger cars, household appliances, and electronic goods. 3 analysts interviewed by Reuters indicated Russia's slowing economy and market saturation with Chinese goods partially contributed to reduced demand. Vladislav Onishenko, head of the Russian think tank Agency for Economic Transformation and Development, highlighted that this decline was particularly noticeable in the automotive sector. Russia remained the largest single overseas market for Chinese cars for 2 consecutive years, but growth rates significantly slowed, from a 459% year-on-year growth in 2023 to just 28% last year. Nevertheless, Chinese auto exports to Russia totaled 1.2 million vehicles last year, accounting for over 18% of China's total car exports. Onishenko explained, the slowing car imports may be linked to speculation about Western car makers possibly re-entering the Russian market, as well as slower growth in Russian incomes. He also mentioned expectations that Western brands might return, weakening consumer willingness to buy Chinese electronics and appliances. Alexei Polshikolden, head of Russia's Association of Automobile Dealers, added that imports of heavy equipment such as cranes and excavators have heavily declined since November and December of last year. The Financial Times reported that on March 10th, quoting Rhodium Group automotive analyst Gregor Sebastian, that Russia shares concerns seen in other countries about cheap Chinese cars flooding the market and damaging local manufacturing. He said, "We want Chinese cars to increase local production. For a while, they felt like they had no other choice, but now they realize they have bargaining power." A survey in Russia found that 3 major Chinese truck manufacturers violated safety standards, leading to a ban on one of their vehicle models. Russian officials have indicated that they may impose new compliance and testing checks on imported vehicles. Chery, a state-owned Chinese enterprise, is Russia's largest Chinese car manufacturer. According to data from the China Passenger Car Association, Chery sold 430,000 vehicles in Russia in the first 3 quarters of 2024, which accounts for 28% of its total sales. Alexander Gabuyev, director of the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, said that the weakened demand in Russia is a byproduct of the country's increasingly militarized economy. However, Chinese companies might expand their market share by lowering profits or offering discounts. China and Russia have not only reduced their economic ties, but have also grown apart politically. In particular, on the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war, China had been sidelined due to U.S. involvement. While Russian President Vladimir Putin publicly maintains a friendly relationship with CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping, his focus is no longer on China. Putin has been working to normalize relations with the U.S. On February 24th, he shared views on rare earths, military spending reductions, and U.S.-Russia cooperation, suggesting that both countries could cooperate in fields like rare earths, aluminum, and energy. Putin also interacted with U.S. President Trump, mentioning that businesses from both countries were in contact to discuss economic projects. He also responded positively to Trump's earlier proposal to cut military spending by half. China had originally hoped to use rare earths as leverage in negotiations with the U.S., but Putin's actions appear to be aimed at undermining Xi Jinping's position. The second thing Putin did was help the U.S. handle Iran, offering mediation and assistance in nuclear talks. Commentator Qing Peng noted that this shows Putin does not want to be China's subordinate or to be dependent on long-term support from the Chinese Communist Party. Facing Trump's offer to lift sanctions and restore Russia's status as a major power, Putin is working to help himself. On April 20th, Trump made an attractive offer to both Russia and Ukraine. He said, "Hopefully Russia and Ukraine will make a deal this week. Both will then start to do big business with the United States of America, which is thriving, and make a fortune." The Wall Street Journal revealed that the U.S. proposed ceasefire conditions that balance both sides' needs. 1. The U.S. would recognize Crimea as part of Russia. 2. It would prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. These favor Russia. 3. It would not recognize Russia's control over 4 regions in the east. 4. It would not restrict Ukraine's military size or block Western countries from providing military aid to Ukraine or deploying European troops there. These conditions favor Ukraine. Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have publicly exerted pressure on both sides. On April 18th, Trump warned that if there was no clear progress, the U.S. might withdraw from the peace talks. However, on April 21st, his tone turned more optimistic, stating that a ceasefire agreement was very likely within the week, with full details to be released in the next 3 days. The latest news is that on April 21st, Putin publicly indicated, "We have always talked about this, that we have a positive attitude towards any peace initiatives. We hope that representatives of the Kiev regime will feel the same way." Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov later explained that Putin's comments indicated his willingness to engage directly with Ukrainian representatives to seek a peaceful resolution to the war. Peskov said, "When the president said that it is necessary to discuss the suspension of attacks on civilian facilities, including in bilateral contacts, he meant direct talks with the Ukrainian side." Ukrainian President Zelensky reiterated that Kiev had proposed a ceasefire agreement to stop attacks on civilian targets and is now waiting for a clear response from Russia. Trump has criticized Biden's policies for pushing China and Russia closer together, and many in American politics are concerned that this alliance poses a greater threat to the U.S. Trump, however, sees the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire as a step to drive a wedge between China and Russia, allowing the U.S. to focus its efforts on China. Commentator Yang Wei argued that during the Cold War, the U.S. successfully used China to divide the communist camp in its struggle against the Soviet Union. Now, with China as the greatest threat to the U.S., Washington must leverage the Russia-Ukraine situation to weaken the China-Russia alliance. If Moscow intends to continue the Russia-Ukraine war, it will need China's ongoing support. But if the war ends, China's dependence on Beijing would significantly decrease. If Trump can end the Russia-Ukraine conflict, China's strategy will fail. A victory strategy against China would certainly involve ending the war and splitting China and Russia. During the Cold War, China turned toward the U.S., betraying the Soviet Union and the Communist camp. After the founding of the People's Republic of China, the Soviet Union heavily assisted China, but the two authoritarian regimes eventually turned against each other. Fearing for its survival, China switched alliances and aligned with the U.S. After Deng Xiaoping came to power, he even fought a war with Vietnam to prove loyalty to the U.S. Russia has not forgotten China's betrayal, and therefore will not treat China as a reliable ally. Putin has repeatedly stated he will not align with Beijing. Former CCP leader Jiang Zemin sold over 1 million square kilometers of land to Russia, which benefited Moscow but also made it more cautious about China. This history has made Russia wary, as it believes that if China can sell out its own land and people, it could betray anyone. Putin has long hinted that China, aiming to be the second-largest economy with rapid military expansion, is the real enemy of the U.S. Moscow likely understands that Trump is preparing to take on China, hoping Russia will distance itself from Beijing. This wouldn't harm Moscow much, as long as it can extricate itself from the Russia-Ukraine war in a dignified way. Moscow might even abandon Beijing and cooperate with Trump. What Trump likely wants to see is Beijing and Moscow betraying each other. With the U.S.-China trade war intensifying, the world is clearly picking sides. Putin appears to realize the direction things are heading, and even Ukraine has recognized the shift. Recent actions by Ukrainian President Zelensky indicate he understands that Trump's focus on a ceasefire is part of a broader effort to target China. As a result, Zelensky has chosen a side and began sharply criticizing China. For example, he recently gave several interviews, revealing that China not only supports Russia's military-industrial complex, but also provides dual-use technology to Russia through third-party channels. This contrasts with China's earlier claims of mediation for peace, and serves as evidence of their betrayal of global peace. In response, China's foreign ministry has denied these accusations, calling them groundless accusations and political manipulation. However, at a key moment, Russia's state-owned Sputnik news agency quickly stepped in, praising China for providing Russia with various electronic industrial products and supporting the strategic mutual trust and cooperation between the two countries. As of now, Russia is seeking direct negotiations with Ukraine. If a ceasefire ceasefires agreed upon, it would temporarily resolve the situation, preventing further manipulation or betrayal by Beijing. If Moscow can distance itself from China, it may have the chance to improve relations with the U.S., potentially leading to the lifting of some sanctions. The costly land Russia has taken from Ukraine could be presented as a victory. Seeing that it may be betrayed, Beijing could quickly turn on Moscow, trying to play the role of a mediator. It might appear to mediate, while secretly continuing to fuel the conflict, as the Chinese Communist Party does not want the Russia-Ukraine war to end. However, if Moscow agrees to a ceasefire and seeks to repair relations with the U.S., China's stance might be forced to change drastically. Currently, Beijing is already overwhelmed by Trump's trade war, unable to respond effectively. If the Russia-Ukraine war undergoes a major shift and Russia starts to lean toward the U.S., it would be a huge blow to Beijing.